Okay, this is the car. It's a 2004 Stagea 4-wheel drive Nissan. It's got the 3.5 litre V6, so it's pretty peppy. Only 8 horsepower less than the 350Z. The twin radiator fans, one's died, the other one's almost dead. One has no resistance at all, so it's open circuit, and one of them's still just going on a single speed. So managed to find a cheap source of these online, so I'm putting these in. So if I had to remove the airbox, because the design of it means that one of these legs fails when you try and remove the front part to clear the radiator so that you can get the fan unit out. Now that's done, I'm just jacking up the car to drain the radiator fluid down below the level of this hose, which I need to take off so that I can get the fan support panel and the fans out. Managed to find some new units online which are about 60 bucks each, and I'll just cover the process of putting them back in a moment. Having checked online, the correct part for this seems to be 21487 CD00A. Now there is another fan motor, the difference being the length of the cable, which isn't quite relevant for the OEM ones because they don't have any wiring attached. However, most of the aftermarket ones do, and those are mostly sold as universal fit. So you get a very long cable on the right hand side of the radiator, and the one on the left just has enough cable to come through. So I think what I'm going to have to do there is probably wrap the cable up, the one with the closest plug, so there isn't excessive cable there. Now there is another fan listed, but that appears to be the common replacement part number, and you can also buy the whole assembly. This is a unit I found on Amazon. You notice that has the wiring included, which, as I mentioned, is too long for one position, but it can be easily folded up. And that one cost me $38.35 on Amazon. So all up, that was pretty good compared to the price that the OEM units go for, which I'll demonstrate here. As you can see, those are a lot more expensive at $199.95 US, but you'll notice that doesn't come with the wiring. So this is based more on the actual OEM unit itself. Now these are generally for Infiniti G35 sedan, and you can also use the 350Z parts as well, which is where I got the parts numbers from to try and locate the replacement part. Okay, this is the replacement fan unit from Amazon. As you can see, it has the additional cabling, which doesn't come with the OEM units. I simply have a plug on the unit itself and a separate cable. In this case, the cable on this one is quite short. So you'll notice that I put this unit here with the cable at the bottom. The length is just right to run to the same point on the edge of the radiator, whereas with the other unit you're actually going to end up with quite a lot of cable left over, so there's no way around that. There doesn't seem to be a left and right fitting for replacement motors of this configuration. I'm sure if you hunt around long enough you'll probably find one, but I wasn't patient enough to do that. Okay, so the first step in replacing the fans is to remove the nut from the centre of the fan itself. Then the mounting screws for the motor on the other side of the fan can be accessed, unscrewed, and the existing motor removed. The nut on the fan boss is a 8mm one, and once that's removed, the 3 mounting screws for the fan itself are easily accessible. One thing that is noticeable is that the OEM fan has holes on this side, possibly to allow air draw and cooling, and the replacement unit does not. So I'm hoping longer term that's not going to affect the lifespan of the fan. But those holes are probably there for a reason. I guess we'll find out. By the way, the nuts that hold the bolts that hold the fan into the frame are also 8mm. Since we are going to be removing the cable, we also cable ties here and here, which will have to be replaced when this cable is removed and reinstalled. Okay, with a little bit of work, those clamps are reusable, so they go back on again. Just use a couple of small screwdrivers to release the ratchets on those, and you can get them off quite easily. The new connectors clip straight in, and I managed to lay the cable so it doesn't seem to get in the way of much. You can still use the this clamp here and just run the wiring out through the bottom. If you try and run out through the top where it came from before and through here, you'll find that the cable's too short. Of course, one option would be to use the short cable off the other fan, but then it's slightly too long, so 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. For the second one, I'm going to have to actually fold up the cable just to make sure things aren't too long. It's a bit of a pain, but there you go. Obviously another way around that would be to splice the cable, make it shorter, put a bit of shrink wrap on it, and do it that way. There's very much of it. You're not going to see it later. Regarding these old units, online you'll find a lot of documentation about fixing these. Generally it's just that the brushes have become dislodged or worn. So you can actually strip them down, fix the brushes, reassemble them, but these are 11 years old, so I figure you're going to get a lot of other issues occurring too, so just easy to replace them with the new ones at this stage. I might try fixing the old ones later on just as a project, just so I've got some spares if I need them. Hopefully not, within the life of the car that I'll own it anyway. Okay, now it's tied up. So it just comes out of the unit. This is the clamp there. Just fold it over and clamp it onto one of the supports, and then the connectors just put in there as usual. It's probably the tightest option I found, and it probably impinges least on the airflow. Okay, so that completes the assembly of the fan unit, which can now go back in. By the way, the unit is only attached by self-tapping screws at the top, and it just has feet which go into brackets on the radiator at the base. Okay, reinstallation is simply reversive removal. Now, one thing, when I removed this, I found that this air conditioning line felled the frame when I was trying to remove it. So I undid this mounting bracket, which is just attached here to the front rail, and I moved the aluminium tube slightly for a little amount of bending. If you do find you need to move it, and you may not depending on how it's been installed, just be very careful. Do not move the pipe back and forward, you will weaken the metal. So just a slight bending, just enough to get the piece out, no more. And you should find that's the only main obstruction. That pipe there obviously just bends out of the way. Now at the bottom you'll notice that automatic transmission cooling line. The kink in the middle actually goes to a clip on the bottom of the radiator of the fan frame. So when you're removing it, if it's difficult to get out, make sure you've unclipped that. And of course remember to clip it on when you've finished. And the other thing was, obviously drain the radiator sufficiently to clear the top hose, so you can remove that only from the radiator end. And the overflow line that goes to the overflow tank, just to make sure it's out of the way. So obviously when you're putting the radiator back in, you'll just need to get that hose out of the way again. Once the radiator frame is securely seated at the base of the radiator, the top is installed with two self-tapping bolts. Those will go directly into the top of the radiator and be secured. Once this is completed, I'll jack the car up to get at the lower transmission cooling hose and the electrical connections. You may be able to do that from the top of the engine, in which case you don't need to worry about undoing the under tray. But I found it a lot easier to try and get those connections out. They can be quite tight by undoing them. Once I've secured the radiator frame, I'll reposition and do up the air conditioning tube that I moved. Then put the top radiator hose and overflow hose back on again. Remember, these bolts are going into the plastic in the radiator, so just snug them up, do not over tighten them or you'll strip them. That could mean a new radiator, or at least a lot of plastic welding and then re-drilling. The car is surprisingly low, so you may need to put the standard jack under the car and then jack it up high enough to allow access with the trolley jack. If you are jacking up a car and working on it, do not rely on the jack. Always use axle stands or ramps to support the vehicle. Jacks can fail at any time and you don't want to be one of those statistics. Okay, once you've got the panel installed and secured at the top, if you have drained the radiator, which you probably will have, make sure the drain plug is secure. Again, don't over tighten. Put the automatic transmission line into the clamp on the bottom of the frame panel and do up the two fan connectors, upper, lower. The plugs will be in the correct position on the loom, so you'll be able to determine which is which. Once that's done, retighten the cable clamp, which you have had to have released in order to disconnect the cable from the frame bracket before you removed it. Once that's done, you can then put the under tray back on the car, and you shouldn't have to do anything more under the vehicle with any luck. Once that's done and the radiator hose and the overflow line are reinstalled, by the way, when you're putting the hose back on, try and fit your clips back into the indentations on the hose. It does help with the sealing. Once that's done, you then need to remember to reinstate the O-ring on the airflow meter housing before you put the airbox back on. Make sure you get all of the bolts securing the airflow meter line to the airbox started before you tighten them up. Once this is done, there is a cable clip which clips into the hole on the top of the airbox. Obviously you will have needed to remove this in order to get the airbox out in the first place. Once that's done, you can reinstate the cold air intake and the upper cover for the radiator. Those simply use plastic clips to install. Okay, once that's fully reassembled, the hoses are reconnected, then we need to start filling the radiator. Start with the fill on the radiator tank, fill slowly, allow any bubbles to rise. Once this is full to the top, place the lid then remove the the lead here, just on the rear right of the engine, just before the firewall. Undo that, then start filling that to the top. What you'll then need to do is run the engine. Run it for a few minutes, not till it gets too hot. Then just check to make sure that the water is still here. If it isn't, keep filling. Then you can take it for a test drive. What you probably need to do is fill this top section, open up the heater fully, make sure the water level is still correct, and then go for a drive. Wait for it to cool down, and you may find there's a gap. You'll need to do this a few times. Make sure the air bubble goes away, because it's an air trapped in the engine, and that's not good. That can cause overheating. I'd recommend using a small hose to refill the coolant. And again, you might need a small hose to reach the overflow up there. As I said, check it a few times, just make sure there isn't any air trapped in the engine. Run the heater fully open when you first start it, and that should mean that the water is fully dispersed through the system again. If you completely drain the engine and replace the coolant at the same time, you may need to do it several times to get the air pockets out of the block. If you find the temperature increasing, shut down immediately and make sure the system is properly cleared. Once the lower radiator tank fill is topped off, switch to the overflow and continue filling until that is full. Okay, now you may have coolant left over when you filled everything up. That's because there's still a few air gaps in the engine. Replace the cap on the top bleed line. Make sure the cap on the radiator is closed, then squeeze the top radiator hose a few times. That'll tend to move water through the system. The other thing we'll do in a minute when we start the engine is turn the heater on. That should also drop the level. What we'll do then, before the engine heats up too much, we'll take the cap off the top bleed again and just top off if we need to. Okay, so once everything's reassembled, all of your tools are well clear of the engine, the radiator tank cap and the water bleed cap are reinstated. Start the car. Shuts off and untoward. Turn the heater to maximum just to get the water flowing through the system. Run the engine for a few minutes, not enough for it to heat up hugely. Make sure that the wiring and everything is now clear of the engine. Give the top hose a few presses. That should help the water circulate through any air pockets in the engine and through the heater core. Just do that for a couple of minutes. Don't rev the engine at this stage, the thermostat's not in, so it won't help. Now turn off the engine. Then take the top off the bleed line and just top off as required. Once you've taken the car for your first test drive, just let it cool down and then recheck, top off as necessary. Hopefully then everything will be fine. Once you've run the heater for a little while and you've let any initial air bubbles, turn on the air conditioning. This should result in both of your new fans operating. If they don't, check for a blown fuse or loose connection. Once you've satisfied yourself that the fans are in fact working on the air conditioning, turn that off so that neither of them are going. Then wait for the engine to heat up and ensure that the cooling side of the system is actually working. So turn off your aircon, then wait for the car to heat up. You should notice now that with the air conditioning off, both of the fans are also off. Now one or more of these should come on when the engine gets up to temperature. So wait a few minutes and just confirm that it happens. If that's alright, take the car for a drive. Make sure that the engine isn't overheating. If you still have an overheating problem, just check to make sure that the fans are operating on multiple speeds, which you'll be able to do by just doing a simple electrical continuity test or jumping the fans to the battery. Just make sure that both sides are working. If they are, then the problem lies in your electrical system, and you may need to seek professional help if you don't have any experience with that. So I hope this has been some help to everyone. So good luck with that if you've had a problem with your fans.